The Democratic Party is moving so quickly away from Israel that it's hard to keep up. And it's setting up a big showdown between Democrats and their leaders. If there's one person who reflects the id, the middle, the center of gravity of the Democratic Party, it's Gavin Newsom. So it really made my ears perk up when he said this about Israel recently.
Freeman and others are talking about it appropriately, sort of an apartheid state.
That is the sitting Democratic governor of the largest state in the country, a basically certain candidate for president, labeling the state of Israel an apartheid state. That is a really big deal. And while none of us can see into Gavin Newsom's heart or brain, what we know about him, his shrewdness, his political skill, his ambition, tells us that, at the very least, he now feels a need to say the kinds of things about Israel that, just a few years ago, were limited to the very fringes of American politics. The center of gravity within the Democratic Party has completely and permanently shifted. And there is a real possibility that the full implications of that shift are getting severely underplayed. This is a geopolitical issue, yes, and it's a big one. It's an issue of diplomacy and military and foreign relations, and it matters a lot on all of that. But it also has the potential to change politics here at home, beginning this year. Let's break this into 3 parts. Part 1, pre-October 7th. Now look, let's just be real. A lot of people, in the US anyway, started paying attention to Israel and Palestine after the October 7th, 2023 attack by Hamas and the subsequent war. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Not everyone follows every news story really closely. But history did not begin with that attack or this war. In fact, there had been subtle cracks emerging between Democrats and Israel for years before. So to start off with, let's just do a quick review of history. This isn't going to be exhaustive, it's not going to cover everything, but let's just set the table in a basic way. As wild as it may seem now, there was once a time when U.S. presidents, both Republican and Democrat, did not actually totally align with the Israeli government. In 1982, Ronald Reagan suspended arms to Israel because of its war in Lebanon. He later reportedly referred to its bombing campaign there as a, quote, holocaust. His words. His administration also supported a UN resolution condemning an Israeli bombing of Iraq. His successor, George H.W. Bush, had a really big standoff with the Israeli government over their settlements in the West Bank, which are basically building towns in Palestinian territory for Israeli citizens, taking homes and territory from Palestinians, which international authorities all recognize as illegal. Bush suspended loan guarantees to the Israeli government and even made some fairly strong statements condemning the pro-Israeli lobby in D.C.
I'm up against some powerful political forces. We're up against a very strong and effective, sometimes, groups that go up to the hill.
Bill Clinton was really the president who established the Democratic Party as consistently pro-Israel. Before him, Democrats were much more divided. Jimmy Carter, the last Democratic president before Clinton, was by no means anti-Israel, but he had a distinctly different tone on a lot of issues, especially Palestinian rights, than Clinton, who helped establish the modern pro-Israel bipartisan consensus. That only expanded under George W. Bush, who was then the most pro-Israel president ever. He approved the largest aid packages ever to Israel, and his administration blocked every single UN Security Council resolution condemning an Israeli action. Again, that's all a very brief history. If you want more complexity or a fuller breakdown, there are a lot of places to go. What I'm trying to establish here is where the country and the Democratic Party was when Barack Obama took office. Now, Obama was far from some anti-Israel firebrand. In 2008, he spoke to the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, aka AIPAC, and promised continuing support for the country. But he did want to constrain those Israeli settlements, and he was way more outspoken about that than George W. Bush or Bill Clinton. He also wanted to negotiate, rather than just go to war with, countries like Iran. And that meant there began to be growing tension between Obama and the Israel Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu. And that helped plant the seeds of a lot of Democrats' frustration with Israel. Some examples. In 2010, Obama sent Joe Biden, his vice president, to Israel to check in on negotiations over peace. On that exact day, Netanyahu's government announced more illegal settlements, basically an FU to the Obama administration. In 2011, Obama gave a major speech that endorsed returning Israel and Palestine to the borders that both countries had in 1967. A couple days later, Netanyahu gave a speech to Congress in which he said,
Israel will not return to the indefensible boundaries of 1967.
Another FU. And that only got worse in Obama's second term, when he was negotiating a deal to try to end Iran's nuclear program. Israel strongly opposed that, and Netanyahu again went to Congress to give a speech, and this time he was even stronger. He used the speech to directly lobby Congress to kill the deal. Now, whether you think he was right or wrong, that was a big departure from how small countries that depend on US aid deal with American politics. And it really ticked off Obama and his people. By the end of Obama's term, he had grown so frustrated with Netanyahu and Israel that in December 2016, he allowed a major UN resolution that condemned Israeli settlements to pass. That was the first time the US had not vetoed a resolution like that in decades. Obama, in his final weeks in office, had subtly broken the unyieldingly pro-Israel consensus that existed under Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. And again, this is a very abbreviated summary, and there's a lot of reasons for this. And a ton of it has to do less with Obama moving left and more with the Israeli government moving far right. But still, before all of this, before Hamas's attack, before the assault in Gaza, before the wars in Iran and Lebanon, there was already something in motion with Democrats. Part 2, post-October 7th. So all of that was Democrats' movement through Obama, and their annoyance with Israel only continued through Trump's first term, when Netanyahu made an increasingly overt alliance with Republicans. Now, the funny thing is, Joe Biden's presidency kind of put all of that on pause. For all the ways that Biden moved left, making an alliance with AOC and Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, trying to be like FDR and LBJ, he remained as staunchly pro-Israel as he has always been. And that really showed after the October 7th attack by Hamas, in which over 1,000 people in Israel were killed and about 250 more were taken hostage. Biden backed Israel at every turn, even as international watchdogs began to warn of the devastation to Palestinian civilians from Israel's retaliatory war. Now, as always, you can think whatever you want about this, but it is just a fact that dozens of international watchdogs, including Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, and a special UN commission have all designated what Israel has done in Gaza as a genocide. And that has fundamentally transformed Democrats' opinion on Israel. We talked about this a little bit in our last video. Go check it out if you haven't. In winter 2026, Gallup found that for the first time ever, more Americans now sympathize with Palestinians over Israelis. That has overwhelmingly been driven by Democrats. Look at that chart. A net 50-point swing since 2022. Hey, you're watching, so you might as well subscribe. And while you're at it, subscribe to my newsletter at thelongrun.news. Link in bio. Other polls are also finding Democratic voters moving. Here's an NBC poll released in March. In 2023, Democratic voters were split almost exactly equal in their opinions of Israel. Now they view it negatively by 44 points. And that's also changed Democrats' views of US policy. A March poll from Quinnipiac found 62% of Democratic voters believe the US is too supportive of Israel. And all of this has seemed to trigger a deeper cultural change among Democrats, a bigger reckoning with who they like and identify with. Here's an example. A Pew poll from fall 2025 found almost half of Democratic voters now view the Israeli people negatively, while 70% view the Palestinian people positively. So by any conceivable metric, Democrats have had a total sea change in their views of Israel. And that's already showing up in how even pro-Israel people talk about the issue. Take Valerie Fouché. She's a Democratic congresswoman from North Carolina who was once elected with the support of pro-Israel groups like AIPAC. This year, facing a challenge from an anti-Israel progressive, she totally renounced the group and said she would support legislation that would block the sale of US bombs to Israel. That proved to be just enough for her to eke out a win in the primary. Another example came in the Illinois primaries. The state had 4 open, deep blue House seats, and AIPAC and affiliated groups spent millions of dollars on those Democratic primaries. Now, they did win 2 of them, but they flopped in the other 2. And one especially was a big embarrassment. They spent millions of dollars to support a staunchly pro-Israel state senator, Laura Fine, and she came in 3rd, behind a very anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian progressive and a local mayor who is critical of the Israeli government. And polls in the run-up to that race showed that Fine's support from AIPAC probably hurt her. Most Democratic voters viewed her the most negatively in the field. And that negative association is one of the reasons that ads from pro-Israel groups in Democratic primaries don't actually mention Israel, like, at all. In fact, if you watch their ads, you would have no idea who's paying for them or what they care about. And that, more than anything, shows how toxic this issue has become among Democratic voters. So toxic that it's hard to imagine it not becoming an issue in 2028. Part 3, the 2028 issue. In the background of all of this is now the 2028 Democratic primary for president, which is coming quicker than you think. Unless something big changes quickly, it's hard to imagine the U.S. relationship to Israel not becoming a big issue in that race. Essentially, a bar that any candidate has to clear to win. How exactly you clear that bar, what stance exactly you stake out, that's still unclear. But it's going to be different from the last few Democratic presidents. And that could really reshuffle a lot of the race, especially for certain candidates. Kamala Harris stood by Joe Biden's Israel-Gaza policy without any substantive break. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro has been very hesitant to follow other Democrats into being anti-Israel. Senators like Alyssa Slotkin, Ruben Gallego, and Mark Kelly have either pro-Israel records or mixed records. They would have to explain a lot of their votes and stances. Now, there's no guarantee this will be as salient an issue come 2028, but there are also some mounting signs that it will be. The war in Iran could end tomorrow, next month, or in 10 years, depending on what President Trump is feeling at any given moment. But its ramifications are going to be felt for a long time. And this was a war that, objectively, and in the administration's own telling, the US was at least partly pushed into by Israel. Then there's Israel's other war in Lebanon, which is becoming its own crisis. It's hard to imagine all of this stuff resolving by the time Democrats are on a debate stage. Now, the elephant in the room is that Democrats' two congressional leaders, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, both happen to be some of the most pro-Israel Democrats in Congress. And as long as they're in charge, it's going to be hard for the party to move a huge amount. But Democratic leaders underestimate their party's change at their own peril. Just listen to how liberal journalists and influencers talk now.
The Democratic Party's position on Israel-Gaza is morally indefensible.
I don't think Democratic candidates should take money from AIPAC or vote to fund military support for Israel anymore.
Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal. We have to stop funding the war.
Like it or not, these are the people who will have a huge influence in the 2028 Democratic primary. And in a lot of ways, their movement is the most striking and the most powerful long term. We saw this happen once before with Republicans. A gulf opened up, with party leaders on one side and party voters and media on the other. We saw who won then. And it might only be a matter of time before Democrats face a similar reckoning. All right, that's it for this week. Hit that subscribe button and remember to hit subscribe to my newsletter.